So he went back to Bethany. It's about 2.5 miles from Jerusalem. So this starts with them going. They've gone, he's come in, they've done all this Hosanna stuff. He's gone in, he's looked around, and then he's gone home. So let me ask then, have you ever been to visit an ancient ruin and stood there and thought, what was it like in its heyday? When this was actually functioning and working, and you try and imagine where the pantry was. Like one of my favourite castles is Carnarvon Castle. I adore Carnarvon Castle. And you can get 3D images of what it looked like. So you have to take yourself back to a time where the temple stood. And for Jews, it was the holiest place on earth. And it stood in all its glory. It was massive. Like you've heard me say when we started in our praise service on a Sunday night, you would come along with your friends and your family and you would all journey together and you'd raise up the hill. And as Jews, you would sing songs of ascent because you were going to see the temple. The temple is crucial to this. So now he's gone back to Bethany. He's looked around. He does nothing here. He just looks. And then he goes back. But remember who's with him. Lazarus is with him. Lazarus is whom he's risen from the dead. Is there with him. And it says he doesn't move. He stays there. Probably for 2 days. And then the people come to him to see Lazarus. Now, come on, let's be honest. We would do the same thing. We are drivers. And how many of you drive along with an accident and go, oh, that looks interesting? We all do it. It's called rubbernecking, isn't it? And don't you feel smug when you're on this side of the road flying and you see this lot queuing up and you think, enjoy that while you're driving, mate, because there's a traffic jam just further up there. We all like to look. And if there's something goes on outside right now, if there was a massive crash, my guess is 1 or 2 would want to run out and see what's happened. You would. You're interested. We care. We want to see. And so they've come over 2 days to get a glimpse of Lazarus. Did he raise him from the dead? What's going on? What's happening? So now it says early in the morning he gets up and he was hungry. No breakfast. Probably not. No, because Jesus prayed very early in the morning. So he's got up. He already knows what he's about to do. He's been in Jerusalem. He's seen the sights and come away. Now he's going back. But on his way he's hungry. And he sees a fig tree in the distance. And he goes over to it. Now the fig tree, this is where things get interesting for us in this Western world. This is a metaphor. It's an analogy. It's a spiritual illustration. And they are throughout the Old Testament. A fig tree was known all over Israel. In fact, if you go right back when they come into the land, there they are. The spies spy it out and say there are fig trees everywhere. It's noted for figs. And so you could eat them. They were good to eat. But they would only, the fruit would come before the flower. So you could get a little flower about March, April time. But the figs wouldn't fully grow between about August and say end of October. But you could get some fruit on them. So seeing the leaf, Jesus thinks, aha, there's going to be fruit on there and I can eat it. And there isn't. There's nothing there. So he curses the fig tree. Hence I started, cursed is the one who trusts in man. He's bringing this idea of the Jewishness of what happens when you turn away from God. So look what he does. When he gets to the temple, we'll come back to the tree. He enters the temple courts. Earlier, he just looked around and went home. This time, he's about to do something much more dramatic than that. Because remember earlier, we looked at the story Sarah spoke of. They said, Hosanna, this is the king, this is the king. And what they thought was he was coming to overthrow the Romans. And there's another thing, you can look at all the Roman ruins, and it's really hard for us to try and get our head around an empire that once existed for over 400 years. It's twice as old as the United States of America. And it was powerful, and it didn't see the world the way we see it. In fact, it saw the world very, very differently. Violence, war, death was part and parcel of Roman life. It's not built on this idea that we have of love your neighbour, be nice to your friends. Here is a lovely NHS, and we'll give you some benefits if you can't work. The Romans didn't do that. It was a very different world. One emperor kicked his own wife to death and then took a boy that looked like his wife, castrated him and made him his wife. Rome was a very different beast. And the Jews had had enough of this and wanted rid of it. So he comes and they think this is the moment, but he's not coming for Rome. Look what he does in the temple. He overturns the table, the money changers, those selling doves. He would not allow anyone. So would you go in, he'd come through a gate, and as you went in, there was the outer court for you and I, the Gentiles, then there was the women, then there was this, then you went higher and higher and higher up Mount Moriah. I haven't got time, you can go back right back to Abraham and Isaac, and then later on someone buys the land, and they start to build a temple right there, because it's a holy ground. But as you go higher, it became almost like an airport departure lounge. There was things everywhere to be sold, of all kinds of glitz and stuff, idols, you name it, it was all there. And the priests, the chief priests, took their cut. So it was like a mafia. It was like Victor said today, he went to buy some tickets, and all he wanted, he was at the booth. And they said, there's a booking fee. And he said, hang on a minute, I'm stood right in front of you. Why is there a booking fee? Well, that's what the chief priests were doing. There's a booking fee. You owe us the money. They were making an absolute shed load of money, when it should have been a house of prayer where people should have been welcomed. Now, we haven't got time, but we could go into the history of the temple and who built it and how it was smashed to bits and then rebuilt. And then we know of Herod the Idumean, who spent millions in our money on this temple, beautifying it, making it big, making it a wonder of the ancient world. The Romans adored the temple. They thought it was a blessing because the Jews had an old religion. But the one thing they could never get their head round was there was no idols, but that's not the point. The point here is he's come and he's turned it over and he said to them, my house will be called a house of prayer, but you've made it a den of robbers. So the metaphor, now you're coming back to the tree, is he's come to Jerusalem, to the temple. He's come looking for spiritual fruit and found leaves. He's found corruption. And basically what he's saying is when the nation is corrupt, when the leaders are corrupt, the rest is corrupt. The people are corrupted by their leaders. A house that should have been a house of prayer, where the poor could bring an offering, was no longer acceptable because they were making money out of it. They turned it into a racket. And so he turns the tables over, he gets cross. The zeal, it says, consumes him. He's come looking as their king, that they've just proclaimed him not long ago. He's looking for some spiritual fruit. He's looking for something from the nation of Israel who claim this temple is where their God lives. This temple is where he is holy, where they meet face to face with him. That he's looking for something and it's not there. What he finds is corruption. A man-made system that says, no, you can only approach God this way, by giving me money, by doing this, by performing this ritual. And it always happens with religion. We found it in the early church. Once the Roman Catholicism of the early days got hold of this faith, look what they did. They brought in the same thing. You paid priests like me to say something called a chantry mass, so your soul will get out of prison quicker. There was a phrase that said, as soon as the coffer in something, I can't remember what it's called now, in rings, so from purgatory the soul will spring. That's how they built St. Peter's Basilica. It was corrupt. And you all know Martin Luther's thesis on the door. He saw the corruption and he challenged it. And it nearly cost him his life. And so here, Jesus does exactly this. So when he looks at the fig tree, he's saying there should have been fruit on you. And there isn't. This is a metaphor for the nation of Israel and what is coming. They're going to be cursed. He says it's going to be left to you desolate, O Jerusalem, how I was long to gather you. In other words, what he's saying is, all that you have built is going to come crashing down upon you. It's a warning. And when he says, may you never eat fruit again, and they said they hear him, and then said, look, it's withered. It's a metaphor to say to Israel, you're going to lose your temple. And the Romans in AD 70 destroy it. And then in 138 they destroy it again, and not one stone is left on another. The Romans didn't mess about when they destroyed your city. They would destroy it completely, brick by brick. They would murder anyone they had to murder. And you can read all of this about the Jewish wars, and Josephus, he describes it in great detail. It's not pleasant reading, but it's history and it's there. So Jesus has come. Let me say it again. This is what this is. He's come looking for spiritual fruit, for that is what Israel should be producing. The temple should be open to all who need to pray, who feel lost, who've journeyed, like I've said, for miles and miles and miles to get to this temple, because that's where they think they must be, because that's what their scripture tells them. When they get there, they find they haven't got enough money to join in. They can't afford to change the money in the temple. They can't afford this good. They can't afford that good. whereas the high priest is sitting in luxury on fine silk and ruling and taking. And so basically what God is saying to them here is, you are going to have this left to you utterly desolate. You, Jerusalem, are now, I'm sorry, cursed. He's looking for fruit. And then that comes back to us as a church. What would he say of us? Are we producing fruit? Fruit that God calls righteous. This is why we've been walking this road of worship. What does God care about here in this temple? He cares about worship. Yes, go with me. Jesus saw all the horror and the exploitation, but he doesn't say anything about it. He says to his people, love one another. You go back this. What he's dealing with here is worship. How is their God to be worshipped? According to what he says, so that all may come, even the poorest of the poor, or is it a man-made system? And when you see the woman who puts her coins in, that's all she's got, we read Jesus looks at her and we think he went, oh, no, the word is angry. He is furious that a religious system has built so that a woman is obliged to put in all she has left to live on. And that happened in the Roman Catholic Church in medieval times. You would hand over your very basic living money, because if you didn't, your soul or your children's soul would burn in purgatory. And there was no way of getting them out unless you asked someone like me to come here and chant some words, and then you paid me to do it. That's what's happening here. He's looking for fruit. I keep saying it, but all he finds is corruption. Stinking corruption. So he turns the tables over. He won't let them change anything. He won't let them do it. It says they're amazed. The crowds are amazed. The zeal is so great. Even the crowd are stunned by what he's doing. And there may even been some standing there going, oh yes, about time. It's about time. Because I can't afford to even come to my temple. The only equivalent I can give you is if someone came to this church, coming looking for something to be prayed for, to help, and we said, that money's not good enough, you need to change it into the money we use in church, or I'm not speaking to you. And by the way, the interest rate is. Or if we said to them, I notice you drive a lovely Range Rover there, sir. What would you like me to do for you? Oh, you've got a beat-up old Volkswagen. You can get out. That's the equivalent of what's going on here. So the fig tree is an illustration. It profoundly mirrors Israel as a tree that should grow, and it can grow to 20 feet. It should produce great fruit. It produces leaves, and it sustains people because it's full of goodness when you eat it. I personally hate figs. I think they're horrible. But they were a good food in the ancient world. They were used in the Old Testament. So Jesus is looking at the tree. He's hungry. Do you see? And he's giving out the idea of spiritual hunger, that there are people looking for fruit, spiritual fruit. They should come to the place that should have it. And all you find is leaves. Because nothing in the temple is correct. They are not worshipping God as God says. They're using it as a money-making scheme. Sorry to keep repeating, but I've got to get this across. And because that was corrupt, the people's worship was corrupt, and the people were lost. That's why it says he looks at them like a sheep without a shepherd. It's why they come running to him. Even in Bethany, they need to see him. They want to touch him. They want to hear from him. Because they are hungry spiritually as well as physically. So what does it say? He teaches them. Yes, he feeds them. We know that. The loaves, the fish, the 12 baskets full. But he also speaks to them of spiritual things. Of the things of God. And you're back to what he says to the Samaritan. The Father is looking for people who will worship in spirit and truth. That's what he's seeking, and that's not what was going on in the temple. And so the fig tree is a metaphor. And it says it's withered. And then they're shocked. Rabbi, look, the fig tree you cursed has withered. And Jesus is stunned and he says, have faith in God. In fact, later on he says, if you have mountains, you can say, go throw yourself into the sea. He's not literally saying a mountain will pick up and move. He's talking about how we trust. What is our faith? And what does Paul say about Christians? Come on, believers, those who are Christians. By what shall you know them? By their fruit. It's a big image in Paul. By their fruit ye shall know them. How do you know they're Christians if they tell you? By their fruit. How do you know someone who stands at the front? By their fruit. How will you know if someone who's praying is by their fruit? And in fact, I read this bit here. It has no worries of drought and never fails to bear fruit. In fact, what does Jesus say in John 17? I appointed you what? To go and bear fruit that will last. That's what he calls us to do. To go and bear fruit. Fruit in our own lives that changes and challenges us. That makes us uncomfortable when we come face to face with the things we want to say, oh no, God, no, I'm not dealing with that. That will mean that, no. And God says, no, I'm going to deal with you because you're going to deal with me, which is what would have happened in the temple. A priest was a conduit. That's all he should have been. A way to say, okay, come, let's do this together. You're not alone. But you were when you came face to face with your God. So that's what it should be. That we're here as a church bearing fruit in our lives, challenged and changed. And like I said this morning, when we see injustice, fired to say so. To point out, like the temple, hang on a minute, you're sitting on silk. You're exploiting the poor when people in Papua New Guinea can barely get anything. And yet we give them what we can so that they can have something of life to the full. So we should be bearing fruit individually. Second, the church should be. And this is where it gets controversial. Because whom are we asking people to come? When Shirley goes out, when we go prayer walking, when Steve knocks on doors, when we do this great outreach, when we bring the kids in for Kids Zone, what are we doing? We're trying to tell them of the fruit of a God who loves them. And a world that wants to tell them, and I've said this again and again, and I'm sorry to keep repeating it, look like this, be like that, act like that, or you're not loved. Barbies in the cinema. How many girls are we going to tell that this is what you must look like? How many girls are going to hear this message again and again and again? Unless you've got lips like this. And don't tell me half of these people on the news are like that. They don't have Botox, have they? Because the muscles don't work. And yet that's what we're promoting. Do you know men? More and more men are now going in for cosmetic surgery. They're having implants in here. Because we're giving this message. And it's as corrupt as the temple's message to the Jerusalem people. And it made the Jerusalem people lost, and it's making our world lost. And Jesus looks at us as his church and says, so where's your fruit? Or do I find just leaves? Because let me say what he says to a church when he finds leaves. Cursed are you. That's what it says in Revelation, I have this against you. So it's for us as a church, as I close, to say, okay, Lord, how do we bear fruit? How do we worship you the way you want? How do we draw men and women who are hungry in? How do we meet their spiritual need? That if they are hungry, like Jesus, they come to the fig tree of All Saints and there's fruit on the tree. And they can eat that fruit. And they will look at us and say, well, you've got something here, haven't you? That's my longing. That some way in this week, and then our fun day, that someone, even one, will ask what we've got and want more of it. We might want to come to Hope Explored because they are hungry. And we can say in this church, there is fruit on our tree. So that the Lord will say to us, blessed are you, All Saints, for you trust in the Lord. Your confidence in him. All Saints, you are a tree planted by the water that sends out its roots by the stream. It does not fear when heat comes. Its leaves are always green. It has no worries in a year of drought and never fails to bear fruit. Now let me ask you, if God said that about this church, what would you respond? I know what I'd do. I'd embarrass you all by dancing in the aisle. And my children will probably never come to church again. But we may never fail to bear fruit. So what am I going to say here now? This week, pray. Pray. On Saturday, when we're in Kingscote, you can put aside half an hour if you're not there. Pray that we may bear fruit. Pray that those who are hungry come in seeking spiritual figs, we will be able to say, there's the tree and there's the fruit. And pray that this church will worship him as he deserves. And in our own lives, we'll bear fruit. And then as a church, we will also bear fruit. And finally, have you noticed in the whole of the scripture, this is the only time Jesus destroys anything. We saw this morning, he heals the leper, he raises the dead, he feeds the hungry. Never does he do damage. Here he does. Because he's come looking for something that should be and is not. And it's led to corruption, and it's led to loss, and it's led to exploitation. And so he curses the fig tree. And so Israel loses its temple. And it's not had one since the Romans destroyed it. There will be one. There will. In the future there will. But there isn't one now because of this. This is why it's important. When he curses it, it comes to pass, and it's not been rebuilt. So I'll stop there. So may we bear fruit. Look honestly at ourselves as a church. This coming week we're going to have all the meetings of all the leaders and the musicians, and I want to ask all of them, how are we worshipping? Are we worshipping in spirit and truth? What more can we do to worship him as he demands? And how do I, as your vicar, how do I bear fruit? And what fruit should I bear that hopefully the community I minister to will see it? So our next song is a reminder that we look into his holiness, gaze on him. That's what the temple should have been. They should have gazed on his holiness and his beauty. They should have had their needs met. And yes, there were sacrifices that would have made the animal. There were lots, I know, I understand, there were lots of animals used, but still the point was, it was a way of coming to worship and express a need. But it was taken away by the greed of man. And I want to say to our church in this England, please be careful. Make sure you're bearing fruit and not just leaves. Because if the church only bears leaves, that curse will fall on that church. And it's not something I ever want to see. So let's sing. Let's look into his holiness and ask him, if you want, Lord, make me bear fruit. Take me, cut me, prune me. Let me bear fruit for you in any way that you want me to. And then as you do it, sorry Hazel and the group, as you do it, commit yourself to pray for what Shirley's taken on. I know Shirley's going to say lots of other people too, and she's right, but don't ever forget to pray for Shirley. Because when she's out there, she's out in a battle with people like the chief priests and the Pharisees who want to stop and bring down. Pray for her. Hold her fast and remind the Lord every day what he promised to do and make him do it for Shirley. Not make him, you know what I mean. Knock on that door. Let's sing, sorry. Go on, Hazel, thank you.